Hello and welcome. You're tuned into The Current. My name is Erin Curran, and thanks for tuning in. The Current is a show to inspire you to embrace change, to spark curiosity, and shift your perspective. Today, I'm delighted to welcome my guest, Kellie Ryan. Kellie is a sexuality educator and licensed massage therapist. Welcome, Kellie.
Thank you so much, Erin.
Yeah, you may also notice my dog Dee is roaming around the studio with us today. So you'll see Dee come in and out of the frame. So Kellie, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I have a question right off the bat that I wonder if some of my viewers might have as well, which is, I'm curious about the term sexuality educator.
Of course.
So often I hear about a sex educator or sex education, and I think of middle school or high school, usually the biology teacher in my memory, talking about body parts and cycles for women and, you know, that sort of thing, the birds and the bees. So I wonder how sexuality educator is different or the same as a sex educator.
Well, that is a great question. So imagine you being in middle school.
Yeah.
And all the things that you gathered at that time. And then think about yourself now and all the things that you realize you did not gather from that time.
Right.
So essentially, I feel like part of my job is that I fill in the gaps for adults about all the education they didn't get. Because sex education is generally limited to, in middle school, it's limited to puberty, consent now. That's now. That wasn't when we were kids.
I don't remember that when I was a kid.
Yeah. So fortunately, there's been evolutions in sex education, but part of what I love is that I get to work with adults and sort of destigmatize and demythologize what sexuality is and personalizing it and helping them personalize, like, what is sexuality to this person?
Yeah, I want to pause on a word you used, demythologize. Like, what? Like, break that down for me. When you think of the mythology of sex, are you talking about sort of like expectations and stereotypes that may not fit the individual?
Yes, that's a big part of it. Certainly when I was growing up, there weren't conversations about any sort of spectrum of orientation, gender, sexual preferences. I mean, we weren't really talking about sexuality as a form of something that we enjoy doing in our bodies.
Right.
So then there's also that. There's like destigmatizing this idea of pleasure.
Right.
You know, and taking either taking perversion out of pleasure or adding that perversion it's like a really negative word.
Yeah.
So both, it's really just changing the relationship of how we look at ourselves as sexual beings.
Yeah. Yeah, what you're saying is reminding me of like sort of a broad theme I like to bring on the show, which is nourishment.
Yes.
And how we nourish ourselves.
Yes.
Because I'm thinking about pleasure, and it's interesting you're talking about, you know, like taking pleasure, not making it a bad word, because I think sometimes maybe it's our Puritan past or our New England in particular sort of history that we tend to say that's not okay.
Right.
And the movement form I teach, NIA, we do talk about pleasure and tweaking the movements so they feel good.
Yes.
And that's movement choices for pleasure. But I think too about food and nourishment and how we, you know, do we enjoy what we're eating?
Right.
How can we make it more enjoyable?
Right.
And the same thing with sexuality and touch and simple things, you know, and relationships, you know. And I think so often people end up in relationships, in part, there's an initial attraction, certainly, but then there's also sort of the logistics, the practicality of being married.
Right.
You know.
And are you good at negotiating with each other in a way that's you feel safe, and beyond safety that you also feel it's sort of a combination of both feeling safe and feeling inspired to be honest.
Yeah.
because we can all say we want to be honest, but do we actually feel inspired and are we rewarded for being honest?
That's a great point.
Because in a lot of relationships, we're not honored for being, or we're not, we get a lot of pushback about the things that we're honest about.
Right.
So when it comes to sexuality, it's such an easy place for us not to be completely honest.
Right.
And I think, I have my own experience of that. I think that's probably why going into sexuality education became important, because to your point, it's like this is potentially a big part of our lives because it affects our relationships, especially our romantic ones. And how we can be fully ourselves in those relationships is it's an amazing gift when we can be, and it's an amazing burden when we can't. So I feel like sexuality really becomes this integration of nourishment, pleasure, and really at the core of it is self-love, like being willing to be honest with ourselves, and exploring what it is that makes us feel like that titillating, like, oh my God, I love being me right now. I love the way this feels. I love being alive in this moment.
Yeah, two other words that come to me that you were saying, expression and play.
Yeah, yes.
I think that's one of the main ways that adults can play,
Right.
And again, safety is so important, trust and honesty, So I love those things, and maybe we'll come back to some of those bigger words and look at them more in detail. I wonder if you'd be comfortable, or if you have anything more to say about what inspired you along your path to choose this, to become a sexuality educator.
Right.
Whether there's any part of that story that you'd be comfortable sharing with our viewers and with me today.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there's probably many answers to this one question.
Yeah.
But when I think about my childhood and the level of innocence and play, there's a remembering for me that was like the ultimate, like I loved being a child. And I think part of me wanted to extend that openness, that enjoyment, that innocence into my adult life. I don't know that it was conscious, but there was just this like, I want to play, I want to be engaged in the world. I want to know. Yeah, I want to be experiencing pleasure. It didn't feel connected to sexuality per se, but just wanting that to be a big part of my life.
Yeah.
And then adding sort of a backstory of also being a younger person. I'm not sure how old, and I actually asked my mom a question, because I had lots of questions as a kid.
Yeah, sure.
And most of us do. And one of those questions was, I was old enough to know what an orgasm was, but I wasn't old enough to know, I didn't know what it was, but I had heard of it.
Okay.
And I knew that there was a sense of pleasure or something, it was really elusive.
Yeah.
Well, it stayed elusive.
Right.
It stayed elusive until forever. I mean, there's still an elusive component to it. So when I asked my mom this question, and why this is personal to my life, is that there was an amazing sense of energy when I asked that question that was just I don't want to answer that question right now. And she was really honest about I don't want to talk about that. And I don't know what the reason was. But I remember feeling this sort of intensity, or not shame in asking the question, but whoa, that question has a lot of meaning to it.
That's a loaded question.
That is a loaded question. And I think from that moment on, I was aware that sex was loaded. And I wanted to sort of know why.
Yeah, you wanted to unpack it a little bit.
I wanted to unpack it. So I think between being someone who loves pleasure and loves unpacking things, I was like, well, sexuality has to be unpacked. So I guess I'm gonna go there.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And I know exactly what you mean. And I think kids know when they talk to adults, or adults avoid something, or the energy shifts. Totally aware of that.
Right.
I mean,
we
are
aware of everything. And so are we, but I think as kids, we're not taught yet to pay attention to other things. We're really getting a grasp of who's who do we trust, who's saying what, who has answers that resonate, who has answers that don't.
Right.
And I liked my mom's answers for the most part and felt safe around my mom, very safe. But when this particular question came up, and When this question came up, it was just a real energy shifter in the room. It was like, I want to know more about that. I mean, I was young. I mean, lots of my life happened between that moment and deciding to go into sex education. And that really, I mean, there's so many other sort of pieces that go into that feel like it would take the whole show, really. It's a long story.
It is a long story. I thank you for sharing what you did. And so now I'm curious because you're not only a sexuality educator, but you're a licensed massage therapist.
Right.
So I'm sort of wondering about whether, no pun intended, those kind of went hand in hand, or if you sort of got to know, you've got more knowledge and awareness about the body first, or was it concurrently?
Great question too. Becoming a massage therapist was something that I was curious about in high school. I got a bachelor's degree and studied art, and really so glad that I did that. But I knew probably a year after I was done with college that I really wanted to do something around the body. And I wanted to be moving, like in my physical or in my profession, I wanted to be physical. And so the massage came first. I started massage school in 2003 or 4. And that's where I feel like I just started to dive into like the depth of what the body holds.
Yeah.
Like beyond just tight muscles and beyond just this elusive idea of stress. Like these stories and these ideas that we have about our body image, how a body feels safe, what it means to be present with someone. Like all of those things actually felt like really key instruments in diving into what it means to have a healthy sexual relationship.
Totally. I remember, maybe viewers had this experience, if you've ever received a massage. I remember one of the first massages I received, I started crying, and I didn't know why. It was a little, it was scary and a little overwhelming. And the massage therapist said, that's normal. Really put me at ease about it. Didn't freak out or anything, but is some clue into, wow, there's things that are stored in my tissues, and having someone be this attentive to me. With this kind of, like you said, presence and awareness and quality of touch and pressure and release was very powerful. And so I totally, on a personal note, understand that. And wonder, did you have that experience receiving massage as well? And that also inspire you? Or was it more, I love this body and I want to know more?
It was more the latter. The first few massages I experienced, I was more like, sort of astonished that people made money this way. Like, really? Like, you get paid to like sort of comfort someone, to make their body feel good, but it was really clear that it wasn't sexual, that it wasn't about arousal or anything like that. It was about like, essentially, what does this do to your mind to let your body receive? So I think for me, the first sort of interesting, or really the conversation that became interesting for me, both with my clients and with myself, was what is this thing called receiving? Like letting ourselves pause, be tended to, and there, this also feels tied into my relationship with my mother, just in that she passed away before I went to massage school.
Oh, wow.
So I think there's also this component of massage, and holding space for someone that it has like a maternal feel to it, of like, oh, everyone needs to be held, no matter what the relationship was with their mother or father or their caretakers. Like, we as adults, even though we're not children, still need to be held and be given space to feel those surprising feelings.
I just got goosebumps when you were talking about that, because I really feel the power of those words. Almost regardless of how good or present or not present our parents were, whether both parents were around or not, or whether we were adopted, or just the degree of communication and expressiveness of our parents, I think that those needs continue into adulthood, and it's not like, oh, you're you're dysfunctional, you're, whatever. It's like we still have needs to be held as adults.
Right.
And I think that as a society, we sometimes say, no, that's okay when you're a kid, but,
Right.
grow up, shake it off, ignore it.
Right.
It'll go away.
Right.
And in my experience, it doesn't.
Right. And I think with that mentality, we are then attracted to people who resemble our parents in some way. And then we're looking at them not as a partner, but actually someone who's supposed to fulfill needs that are not being met elsewhere. And I think it puts so much pressure on our domestic relationships, as if there's not already pressure on them, because we're building life with this person. So to lean on them both as a parent, confidant, and lover those things are hard. I mean, they're hard in the best case scenario.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So massage therapy, wanting to know and unpack the power of touch.
Yeah.
That, wow, and you can get paid for this. And what is it to receive? I want to come back to that question. Great. What does it mean to receive? And I guess when I think about a conversation or being present with someone, and it's funny because in conversation so often, I can notice this for myself and I can observe it in others. It's almost like a mic grab. Like,
totally.
My turn. I have something to say now. Oh, your turn.
Yep.
My turn. And it's almost like
wow, competing.
Right. Yeah. Like I have something to say. I'm going to say it, sort of almost regardless of what just came before. Like I've thought of something, and it reminds me of improv too, because it can really show up that way. If you have an idea and you're like, I'm going to say it, but it doesn't go with what's come before. It kind of falls flat. But it can be like that in conversation. And I think being sexual with someone else is like a conversation, but with the body. Right. And so like being open and present to what's come before. And really receiving what's happening now.
Which is like, I think about it sounds like it sounds so idyllic, really. Like, oh, right, it's an improvisation and you get to play and we get to like tend to each other's pleasure and all these things. But it's also, we're working with these scripts that are actually become sort of hard to integrate the script and being present. They actually like clash often. And I feel like it's a real art that I continue to be curious about. It's not like I have all this figured out, but I have this intrigue of like, of presence and I love improvisation. And just this idea of, oh, I have this idea. Of course you do, because you've been given all these ideas of what comes next in this whole sexual play out. And it's like, how do we even get rid of our ideas so that we can have authentic experiences in anything we do? Like sex aside, that's just one place where it shows up really, I think it can show up very, it can feel both disappointing to be inside of a script that you don't want to be in. Or traumatizing for that matter. Or it can be really exciting to be inside the script in a way that you really like. Like there's nothing necessarily wrong with the script itself. It's just that it loops. So.
Is there room for something new? If it's all pre-written.
Exactly. And where does presence play a part in that? I think it's like an essential part. And it takes practice. Just like it takes practice to be like, to listen and take turns and be like, do I interject here? Do I not? Like we're always navigating that terrain if we're so lucky to almost like consciously be a little slower in the way we navigate any interaction. To take that time, be mindful. I'm so curious about a lot of what you're saying, and I want to come back to a point you mentioned, which I feel like
in our day and age, well, we talked about consent being kind of a newer thing that's a part of the sex education per se, but also talked about gender and sexuality and sexual orientation and preference, and just how wide that spectrum of acceptance has. It feels like, at least on some level, I see figures, characters in movies portrayed, I see books authored, I see celebrities more across the rainbow of identification. And this kind of leads me to this question about community and how, what your experience with sexuality and community has been, whether you are able to guide people towards finding community, if that enters into your work at all, or if it's really about being authentic, and then the community kind of is there or appears when we're real.
Right.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing that comes up in my mind when I think about community and where sexuality and all these new sort of open, maybe more expansive ideas. I mean, I think that is happening, but I'm also aware that, the pendulum swings in all these different directions.
Yeah.
And as one, as one sort of theme opens up in terms of looking at gender orientation, sexual proclivities, whatever it might be, and being like, oh, there's so much more space for that. There's also always going to be that polarity of like, oh no, there's not.
Right.
Like, that's not okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we ever quite escape that. So then we have this idea of community where we're incorporating the conversations that are happening over here, these like this expansive, how to be more inclusive, how to create safer spaces. And then we always have that sort of those other opposing voices that may or may not be really prevalent in individuals' lives, but are still prevalent culturally.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, I feel like community comes into that conversation in sort of an interesting way, because I feel that culturally, American culture right now, there's so much nuclearness that's happening. So I think it takes a lot to find community. I think currently, at least what I'm experiencing both, in my own neighborhood and then just seeing with clientele, is just sort of the isolation piece that does come up a lot. So community feels so super important, that we can be resourceful to each other, that we can be in conversation with each other, that we can gather and have conversations. But I feel like that is not accessible to everybody. So as much as I don't quite have an answer to the question, I more have like sort of a concern to the question of how can we build more community where everyone actually feels included. Like, it feels so utopic that, and I feel sort of far away from having the answers to that, but I'm aware that I'd like to.
I wonder, you talked about your clientele, whether it is something that comes up, just this feeling of isolation, like as part of a modern society, cultural phenomenon, just being so device oriented, and so, we live in a car culture, and, all these things, all these ways that we used to have of naturally sort of encountering one another, whether it was on our walk to and from the store, or, living with multi-generations in our household. All these things have sort of been phased out in favor of like modern conveniences, which are making us miserable. But that's aside.
That's a different interview.
That's another, But I wonder, like, so you hear from clients, like, either a difficulty maybe in meeting partners, or maybe it's like do you work with couples or individuals or both?
I mostly work with individuals, and in the case of working with couples, I actually work with them individually.
Oh yeah.
Because they have different stories.
Yeah.
And some occasions we'll have a session with them together. But I mostly work with individuals, and I think that's where I get to sort of hear about some of the isolation and like, oh, I can't talk about this with anyone, including my partner. And it's like, okay. And rather than pathologizing that, because it doesn't feel like an individual, like, oh, that's an illness in your relationship. It feels like a bigger illness of the system that we're in. And, I feel like for me personally, like I have really thrived in community. Like I love to talk about personal things and be able to have sort of a place to brainstorm and be like, no, that's, that's not my experience. Have you ever thought about this? Like, and sort of just sharing information feels so much more progressive to me than searching for information. Because we're all so filled with experience, both limited and we're limited to our experience. So if we're in community and we're sharing our experiences openly, then all of a sudden our like encyclopedia of real life gets a lot bigger.
I love that. I love that image and that point you make, which is like the more voices in the room, the more experiences we're sharing. And it's almost like when I'm hearing it one-on-one, it's like I get to experience it versus doing an online search and reading a blog which has maybe been altered or made up or who knows,
or
you're not getting the person's actual experience. And so community, I think, can be defined by that, like coming together to share stories, in large part, coming together physically to move, to dance. I know that you love to dance as well.
I love to dance.
And, communities that exist for dance. We had a previous guest on the show talking about swing dance and Portland Community Dance, I know, is one of the many communities of dance and movement. So being physically in proximity with one another, actually consciously creating, intentionally creating these opportunities to connect, and not just in a verbal way.
Or intellectual. But feeling each other out.
Exactly. Part of getting to know, I think, and getting comfortable with my own sexuality is getting comfortable with my body, period. Like walking across a room, let alone having an orgasm. Let's start with the basics.
Yeah, that's so over there.
Let me roll on the floor. Feel what that feels like. Oh wow, I'm really stiff in my neck, or just like getting to know my body and how I can make choices or self heal through touch. Sometimes inevitably every time I put my hand up here, there's a spot. And I'm like, that feels good.
I get it.
Maybe
I've got
you're
my
at
own
home
version of that.
or putting a tennis ball under my foot and giving myself a little self-massage while watching a program or doing something else. Even a golf ball, something a little harder can really
I'm really good in
do the trick. But anyway, I digress. I am talking a little bit about movement, that it might be fun to do a little movement together as a little pause, parentheses, if you're willing.
Yes, I'm very much willing.
Cool. Because we've been sitting and talking for not quite a half hour, but just about. And maybe you at home are feeling, I could use a little stretching. So if you've tuned into The Current before, you know maybe what's coming up. I have my magic stack of Nia cards. And those of you who don't know, I do teach a movement class called Nia. I'm a Nia black belt. Watch out. And there are 52 moves in the Nia movement vocabulary. And so each card is one of those moves.
Okay.
So Kelly doesn't know what we're doing. I'm just springing this on her.
I love it.
So I'd ask you to pick a card, any card. It can be top of the deck. It can be the center. If we've done the move before, we'll pick another one, just because I want to give the viewer some variety.
Right.
But feel free to take any card.
I'm not good at statistics, but
you never know.
Yeah.
52, it's not.
This is one of them.
Great.
Whoa.
Oh, cool. Let's put down the stack. What does that say?
Finger flicks.
Finger flicks. This is so exciting. Yeah. So put the stack down. We're going to stand up, and I invite you to stand up at home. So I'm going to read what we're doing, and then we're going to do it, and then we're going to talk about the benefits.
Okay.
So place your thumb over your 4 fingernails. Push. Yeah, exactly. Pushing them against the thumb to create positive tension. So you have a little positive tension building up.
Yeah. I like that we're distinguishing it as positive.
Positive tension.
Positive. Okay.
Then flick your fingers out as if you were flicking water off them. Yeah.
Ooh.
Nice. Do this with your arms extended and also with them hanging down in neutral. So arms extended and neutral. different sensation.
Very.
Different sensation. When your arms are extended, keep your hands below your shoulder level so that the flick uses relaxed power. I would even say you can keep soft elbows with that instead of a tight elbow. Yeah, locked elbow.
I like both.
Yeah. Change the direction of your palms for movement variety. Sometimes I say to my students, flick yourself with water. It's almost like you always blink because it's like, ooh, is there water coming at me? Flick the viewer with water. Okay, we did that. As you do the move, boldly sound the word flick. Use both hands. Flick, 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 flick. Flick, 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 flick. Nice. Now you wonder what the benefits are. Is this just for fun? Are we just playing? Well, or is this serious?
Is that not a benefit?
Good point. Benefits. Practicing finger flicks conditions your forearm muscles and hands, keeping energy flowing into and out of the hands and keeping tension out of the neck and shoulders.
Oh.
So we're actually releasing energy through the hands.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Finger flicks strengthen the forearm, the fingers, and the hands. They also rid the hands of tension, which commonly builds up during the day, due to the extraordinary amount of fine motor movements the hands must continually perform. Devices, computer. So one thing I like to do with any hand technique in Nia is to wrap your one hand around the forearm and then do the move. And feel, if you feel what's happening underneath the skin. Can you feel your muscles at work there?
Certainly can.
Yeah, I have a strong forearm.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Maybe you feel it too. That's really cool. And the other thing I love about the forearm is that they're the only two,
The radial.
and ulna are the only two bones that spiral in the whole body. So that is really cool. We get to spiral our finger flicks.
Right.
Thanks for pulling finger flicks, Kelly.
I'm glad I did.
Now, this is a great thing to do if you have been working on the computer. You just need to release that tension, or coming out of an encounter or a meeting or something, and you're just like, woo, shake it off.
I think intuitively,
Yeah.
I've seen many people do that,
Yeah.
including myself, just like, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
So it feels really good.
Yeah, and one thing that I've learned over my Nia trainings is that if you're not sure you're doing it right, bring your fingernails up to your ear, and you should be able to hear the flick. And one thing I also like to do is to do individual finger flicks and include the thumb. So you actually flick the thumb out as well.
Yeah.
And then go back through and flick the individual fingers. Yeah, nice. Thank you, Kelly.
Of course. I mean, this feels a little bit flamenco. I don't know.
Totally,
If there's
totally. Or like castanets
Yes,
or
maybe that's
something.
what I'm thinking
Well,
of.
no, not maybe the bells for belly dance too. The little chimes.
Right.
There's probably a word for it. But anyway, let's have a seat back down. You can keep finger flicking from a seated position. That's the beauty of this particular move.
especially if we say something you don't like.
Flick. Thank you, Kelly.
We can be responsible for. Everyone can be responsible for their own experience.
Yes. Great. Yeah, I always like getting up and moving a little bit on this show, as you know.
Yeah.
Well, as you now know.
I now
and as you
know.
know.
And I appreciate that because it moves the energy. It feels like it creates a new space.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, now
what?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, one thing on the current that I ask guests often is to talk about, life change. I mean, life is change, right? It's the only constant. Things are changing all the time, external circumstances, but also our internal state. Like we're creatures in evolution. And we're always evolving and processing. And for those of you who don't know why we're laughing, as I said, we're always evolving and processing. My dog let out a big fart. So Kelly and I are like smelling this really intense smell. And that's why we're giggling, because like Dee is processing and
Right.
she's changing, right?
Yes. She's metabolizing
She's
and
metabolizing.
inviting us into that experience.
Yeah.
Maybe not intentionally.
Maybe not, but maybe so. So anyway, the smell has passed and you have been spared at home. So consider yourselves lucky. Yes, Dee. So anyway.
I'm glad Dee feels comfortable.
Yeah, I am too. We're creatures in evolving always. And so I wonder. Yes, I wonder if there was a time or moment in your life, Kellie, where you sort of like recall that change, either an external change or something that you just felt like, oh, I need to do this, or I need to stop doing this for my own sanity, my own well-being. Do you remember? Is there any time in your life where either you were forced into a change, or you just felt that internal pressure cooker, like I gotta change.
Right.
Yeah.
I definitely have had those experiences, and when I think about sharing one, I'm not really sure which one to share, or like it's almost like I've had that feeling so many times. And some of those stories are probably much more dramatic than others. But I mean, I just think about how I have them on a day-to-day basis, trying to get myself out of a mindset. I can really come into a day feeling a certain way and then be really affected by the interactions that I have. And if those interactions are negative or anxiety-filled, it's like, I just need to flick more maybe. But I think that's probably another reason I've gotten really interested in why I was interested in body work and massage, is because I'm interested in changing states.
Yeah.
And having some agency in changing states.
Yeah.
That sometimes is, getting someone else involved, or, paying for body work. But sometimes it's something like some sort of embodied exercise. Like, how can we just change? Like, I cannot be having these negative thoughts about myself right now, or I can't be having these negative thoughts about someone else. So there's those micro changes that are like happening all day.
Yeah.
But when I think about like big life changes of like, wow, I need to do something different.
Yeah.
It's probably, one example that feels easy enough to share is just needing to move.
Yeah.
And feeling like it was just time to pick up and have a new life. And when I moved to Maine, that was part of my mentality. It was just like, I'm ready to move and evolve towards the next thing. And I happened to follow a relationship here, but that relationship didn't last. But somehow the feeling of being, I'm just going to use this word because it's just coming up, it's like impregnated by Maine. Like, what the hell does that mean? But like this feeling of like
you received Maine.
I had no idea I'd been pregnant before. But like just this feeling, I received Maine. It was like, wait a second, I'm here. This isn't working out. This isn't resonating. But this whole this community of people and this shoreline and these trees and this granite and this dirt, like there was an elemental quality of like, I needed to move, and then I thought I made the wrong decision, but there was still that feeling internally that was like, I did not make the wrong decision. Like I needed to get everything I got out of that relationship. And like walked away with all the right scars, all the right, like, okay, no, I needed to know that about myself. And I needed to move away from my comfort to be that vulnerable and be that scared and insecure. Like I had to go through all of that and then and hold myself in and not really knowing anyone, not personally. I've been open with people. I was open with people from the get-go, but there was still an element of like, I'm in a new land.
Yeah.
I'm experiencing myself as a totally different person than I was before I left Ithaca, New York. And I feel awkward, like I'm stumbling around for like, who am I? I feel a little bit inside the illusion of what self is, what identity is, all these different big questions, but still feeling like, no, that change was essential. I did not make a mistake. And Maine felt like it was just like, you need to sort of birth what is to be a person living here.
Yeah, like yourself living here.
Yeah, right.
See that to fruition.
See that to fruition.
Yeah.
And that I'm so glad that I did that. Like,
Yeah.
wow, the benefits are ridiculous.
So yeah, like discovering and being open to who Kellie is in Maine.
Right.
You know, having just moved here, and yeah, I love that. And I love that change kind of was maybe initiated by the relationship, like you said, like, okay, we're going to move to Maine, but then it's also sort of being open to how you're being affected by the place and the environment. Yeah.
It's deep.
And
I
the
feel
community.
like
Yeah.
Maine, I have told this to a number of clients who've come in as newcomers to Maine, that moving here feels like a big deal. I mean, I'm sure moving is a big deal, but moving to Maine had a spiritual whirlwind that came with it that was just like, it was like all those things that haven't quite been tended to. Let's get to that. It was like, okay, like, are you sure that's a good idea?
Yeah.
And it was. I mean, it ended up being a good idea for me, and I don't regret it at all. But just an interesting, like, there was an intensity to moving here.
Yeah.
That was different than when I moved to Ithaca, New York, which didn't feel intense at all. It was just like, you know, it felt like just such a container for whatever I was doing there. And Maine was more of a test of my like strength and endurance and ability to hold my own strengths. It was a test.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I want to come back to something that actually we were talking about a little bit off camera, which was, having you on the show as a sexuality educator and knowing how people's comfort level with touch can vary.
Yes.
And any kind of touch, even a tap on the shoulder or a friendly sort of, what I would interpret as like a friendly or comforting hand on the knee. You know, that can really, depending on people's own histories with, how they were brought up, if they ever experienced sexual trauma or assault, whether, it's so wide open in terms of what people have experienced. And I know that you don't work specifically with, or you're not a therapist, but you often encounter these stories as part of your work.
Yes, definitely.
And I wonder if you would have any guidance or suggestions if someone is feeling really uncomfortable with any level of touch. If there's anything you would be able to share with the viewers at home, like maybe some tips or places to start. Is that an okay question?
It's a great question.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity really because it's because I really care about human beings and their individual experiences, and there are many people, and some people who I consider very close to me in my life that touch is not something that they feel very comfortable with. And some of those people I know why, and other people I don't. Same with my clients. Mostly when clients come in, there is some unraveling of sharing why touch might be uncomfortable for them, and then why on earth are they coming to see me? But part of that is because I think for some individuals, there's a real desire to have that level of intimacy in their lives, but it doesn't feel safe.
Right.
So there's that building that bridge really carefully.
Yeah.
I've certainly had clients where in the first session, I did not touch them. even though they were coming in to build that skill and to learn about how to feel safe with especially a stranger touching them. So I really like to sort of play in that realm of proximity and just and really checking in, like, what are the body sensations as I just sit closer to you.
Yeah.
So that would be something that might be designed for someone who wants the touch in their life. And then there's people who are touch adverse and they're fine. Then let's not make it a problem.
Right. Right.
So
That's a great point, because here I am presenting it like everyone wants to, and that's simply not everyone's truth.
It's not everyone's truth, but what I like about you saying that is that I do feel like maybe it's everyone's truth, that we want to have some sort of feeling of connection. And I think for a lot of us, that's through touch. And I don't mean sexual touch, just like, that we're making physical contact.
Yeah.
But for some people who may not like to be touched from either a stranger or even their partner, like they just would rather it be a domestic relationship over a affectionate one. Usually there's some part of that person that there's like, I'm going to use the word erotic capacity. And the reason I'm choosing that set of words is that I think that we think of erotic as sexual, but I really believe that erotic is the way that we feel alive in what we're doing. So almost everyone in the human body has something that they're connected to, even if it's so minute, that makes them feel a little bit more alive, a little bit more like, this is why I'm here.
Yeah.
This is why I haven't disappeared. This is my connection to my life force.
Exactly.
And I think it's more about building those connections than building like, oh, everyone wants to be touched and everyone should feel safe. Like, there are some people who might never feel completely safe with other people.
Yeah.
But what can they do or experience that's going to not only make them feel safe, because I would like for everyone to experience beyond the rudimentary safety. It's like, what feels good? Is it being touched by the sun? Is it sitting by a tree? Is it crawling on the ground? I mean, how much?
Yeah.
What is how can we just not limit ourselves? I think we just really limit ourselves to what can actually make us feel excited about being alive.
Absolutely. And I'm listening to you and thinking like, well, of course there's the five senses as doorways in, whether it's taste, smell, touch, sound, movement, sight, visual stimulation. I mean, listening to a piece of music, I was just talking with someone, is soul stirring. I mean, it can be completely exhilarating, orgasmic. I mean, it can really be that level of intensity when we're really attuned, like in tune, paying attention. Same thing with flavor combinations and taste. I love plunging my hand in a sack of like dry beans or rice, because it's all that those little grains. It feels so good. Popcorn. I just love the corn kernels. I just love that feel. Sand on the beach. So there's I think that's a beautiful way in, just to even find out what makes me feel alive. If someone's depressed, really not feeling that aliveness or that desire to be alive, or that vital life force energy you were talking about. But then I think about being new and open to experience, we talk about movement and kinesthetic experiences, whether it's in a swing, in the backyard, or a roller coaster at an amusement park, or crawling, like you said, on the ground, climbing, up a rock or a tree. Changing our position in space and our spatial awareness, literally shifting our perspective in our environment, can make a huge difference and help bring that aliveness to the fore.
Yeah, I sometimes think about it too, as you were speaking, like all those examples are examples of people saying yes to something. And I think sometimes we can get really caught up in all the things that we're like, no, that doesn't feel safe. No, that doesn't feel good. No,
that's not me.
That's not me. That's such a good one, right? Like this idea of like, that's not my identity, so therefore I don't do that thing.
I don't do that thing. Yeah.
And like, what happens if we just start saying yes, not to those things that we want to say no to, because that would be counterintuitive and that wouldn't be respectful to ourselves. But if we start saying yes to the things that we think, so every no that we have, we're saying yes to something. Mm-hmm. We're saying yes to the thing that's either the opposite of that or a different version of that. Mm-hmm. And celebrating the things that we're saying yes to actually like changes the whole energy dynamic of like, so I may be saying, no, I don't want you to touch me, but I'm saying yes to, I want to share this space and feel connected to you. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, so then we get to discover what that is.
Yeah. I'm saying no to going out with friends tonight. Uh-huh. I'm saying yes to having an evening at home alone, or something.
Talk about nourishing, right? Yeah. Right. There's a time for like being in community, and there's time for for that sort of healthy spaciousness with ourselves. Yeah.
Beautiful. And I love that talking explicitly about life force energy, just for me, just pulls back in that theme, which is one of the themes of the show of like, what gives us energy, what inspires us, and to come full circle to you and the body and massage therapy and your mom's answer to that question, Mom, what is an orgasm?
Right.
What is that? Like that gave you energy, saying, explore me. There's something there that wants to be unpacked and learned about and then shared with others. Because you do care deeply for humanity and for your fellow humans. And I'm so grateful that you're around and doing this work, because it's important work. And as you know, and I can tell you, I know as well, there's not everyone ventures boldly into this realm of exploration. I think a lot of times we just feel like it's safer for me to avoid it altogether. And in the movement class I teach, I see that resistance and then that joy at like basically surrendering and saying, okay, I'm going to let it take me, and I'm so glad I did. So it's being open. Is there anything, ways that I think you gave some information that will probably be on the screen in terms of if people want to be in touch with you or learn more about sexuality educators or in their area if they're not local to Portland or Biddeford? Resources you might direct them to?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm always interested if people are curious about sort of diving in, sort of unturning those stones, or what was the word we gave it? Exploration, unpacking is the word.
Yeah.
That's part of what I love to do. So I'm open to unpacking with you, and I also feel like there's lots of resources that come way before you would ever book an appointment with me, which could include what I find is a wonderful resource, and there is some cost to it, but one of the schools I'm affiliated with is called the Institute for Sexual Education and Enlightenment, and that has all of these online webinars where you can just sort of pick out like, oh, I'm really interested in understanding more about transgender people, or I'm interested in learning about like what are some of the myths that many of us believe about sex. Like there are all these different classes that are just like, I've never had this conversation, and they're webinars, so they're not necessarily visually. I mean, they're not visually stimulating, but they're often PowerPoints and someone presenting the information. But I just feel like, how many places can you go and get pretty extensive information on something that's more personal? And then not only that, you're getting access to that teacher. You're getting usually their email and resources. It's just sort of this whole door that opens. And I think when it comes to sexuality, when we start looking up information just Googling, we find so, like, it's too broad, and we might end up bumping into things that is either not really up-to-date information, or just finding ourselves exhausted by being in the rabbit hole of researching something.
Yeah.
So IC is the acronym, and I think it's a wonderful resource for just getting to see a live sex educator talk about what they know.
And again, the name of the whole institute is?
Institute for Sexual Education and Enlightenment.
Cool.
Yeah.
ICE.
Yes. Oh, it's ISEE.
Oh, ISEE.
So it's like I see.
Oh yeah, I see. I see what you're saying. I see the light.
Right.
Well, I think that's a beautiful place for us to wrap up
Yeah.
today. Kellie, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yes.
Thank you for tuning in. You've been watching The Current. My name is Erin Curran, and my guest today was Kellie Ryan. What a pleasure to have you on, and we'll do it again.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.